The storm began long before the thunder rolled. It started in silence, out beyond the edge of the known stars, where the wrecks of humanity's fleets drifted like bones in a graveyard. Out there, among the ruins, one ship stirred when it should have stayed dead. The Black Ship, once feared, once abandoned, once forgotten, lit its engines again. Its armored hull, scarred by wars no one remembered, shimmered with power that seemed impossible. For decades it had been lost in the void, a ghost of the first rebellion. But now, as the final war began, it returned. Not as a relic, but as humanity's last weapon. The aliens had come in waves, each stronger than the last, stripping Earth and its colonies bare, breaking fleets, and crushing every attempt at resistance. For years, humanity had no victories, only desperate retreats. Cities burned under alien skies, and outposts fell one by one. People learned to survive in scattered enclaves, clinging to scraps of hope while the alien armadas tightened their hold. To most, it seemed the war was already lost. But in secret, whispers spread of something stirring in the deep, something that might change the tide. Some called it a myth. Others called it madness. Yet when the Black Ship rose from the graveyard, its massive hull blotting out the stars, those whispers turned into belief. This was no ordinary vessel. The Black Ship had been a flagship in the First War, built not just to fight, but to outthink the enemy. It carried technology no one fully understood, weapons that had been locked away because they frightened even those who built them. Generations had passed since it vanished, lost in an ambush that should have destroyed it. Yet somehow, impossibly, it endured. And now, in humanity's darkest hour, it had returned, not under the command of admirals, not under the control of governments, but awakened by those desperate enough to try what others feared. At the heart of the ship stood a small crew. Not soldiers, not the polished heroes of propaganda, but survivors who had lost too much to keep waiting. One of them, a former pilot, carried the scars of battles he should not have lived through. Another, a strategist who had walked away from the war after watching her plans turn to ashes, now found herself pulled back by duty she could not ignore. A third, once an engineer for the colonies, had sworn never to touch military steel again. But his hands built the only systems that still held the Black Ship together. They were not chosen. They were not ready. But the ship did not ask for readiness. It asked for will. When they stepped aboard, they felt the weight of history in its walls. The corridors hummed with a low power that seemed alive, and the dark plating reflected no light, as if it swallowed shadows whole. It felt more like stepping inside a living thing than a machine. The consoles lit without command, responding as though the ship already knew them, already judged them. It was not only a vessel, it was a weapon with its own will, waiting for humanity to decide whether to unleash it again. The first time they tested its engines, the void itself seemed to shiver. The power it unleashed was beyond anything the aliens had seen before. In that moment, the survivors realized why the Black Ship had been hidden away, why the old admirals had feared it. It was not simply a spear, it was a storm bound in steel, and storms do not ask permission before they break. But as word spread of the ship's return, enemies began to move. Alien scouts swarmed toward the graveyard, searching for the source of the sudden energy spikes. The humans knew they had little time. The rebellion needed a symbol, something to rally behind, and the Black Ship was that symbol. Yet symbols alone do not win wars. They had to prove that this vessel could strike where fleets had failed, that it could pierce the alien blockade, and that humanity was not finished, not yet. The first mission was madness, to break through the enemy's forward line, not with a fleet, but with one ship. If they failed, the Black Ship would be destroyed before it could inspire anyone. But if they succeeded, it would show the colonies that rebellion was still possible. Every eye turned to them, waiting for a sign. The crew strapped in, silent, each knowing the odds. The strategist drew up plans that bordered on suicide. The pilot tightened his grip on the controls. The engineer whispered a prayer to systems he barely trusted. And through it all, the ship pulsed, as if it hungered for the coming fight. When the Black Ship cut into alien space, its weapons lit the dark like lightning. Beams tore through ships 3 times its size. Shields bent and shattered. The aliens, who had grown arrogant after years of easy victories, faltered in shock. For the first time in a generation, humanity pushed forward instead of back. The black ship drove into their lines, unstoppable, tearing a hole that no other fleet could. Behind it, the rebellion surged. Yet victory came at a cost. The aliens were not fools. They adapted, regrouped, and brought their heaviest forces to crush the ship before it could strike again. What followed was not just battle, but a storm unlike any seen before. Explosions lit the void. Hulls cracked. Entire wings of enemy fighters swarmed like hornets trying to tear the black ship apart. Inside, alarms screamed. Panels sparked. The crew shouted over one another as the vessel strained against the impossible. But through every strike the ship held. Still, questions remained. Why had it returned now? Why had it chosen them? And what price would humanity pay for wielding a weapon born from secrets even their ancestors feared? The black ship was powerful, yes, but power always demanded something in return. As the enemy prepared its next counterattack, the crew knew the storm was only beginning. What lay ahead would not just decide battles, it would decide the fate of the rebellion itself. And somewhere in the depths of the ship, beyond the reach of human eyes, systems stirred that no one had touched in centuries, waiting for the moment to reveal their true purpose. The void fell quiet for a breath, the calm before the next strike. Every heartbeat felt stretched, every second heavy with what was to come. The crew exchanged silent looks bound by the unspoken truth. They had stepped into something greater than themselves, something they could no longer turn back from. The storm was rising. The black ship was awake, and the final rebellion had just begun. The storm was rising, but before it broke in full, there was a silence that pressed down on the crew. In that silence came the memories, the scars, the weight of everything that had brought them here. For the first time since stepping aboard, they had a moment to breathe, and in that breath, the truth of who they were began to show. Each of them had carried their ghosts into the black ship, and now those ghosts filled the shadows of its corridors. The pilot had once flown with Earth's defense fleets, long before they were shattered. He remembered the day his carrier burned, how the sky above the colonies was filled with fire and the cries of those who never escaped. He had survived only because his ship had been thrown clear by an explosion, tumbling into the void while thousands died around him. That survival haunted him. Every time he touched the black ship's controls, he felt those voices at his back, as if demanding that he make their loss mean something. His hands trembled when no one was looking, but when the ship moved under his command, his fear turned into something else, resolve sharper than any blade. The strategist had been a voice no one wanted to hear. She had warned the high command that the aliens were not simple conquerors, but something more patient, more dangerous. She had argued for caution when others demanded glory. When her predictions proved right and her colony was destroyed, she left the war behind, bitter and broken. But the war had not left her. Now, standing before the black ship's endless screens, she found herself mapping paths through battles that had not yet been fought, as if part of her had always known she would return. Yet deep inside, she questioned whether she was fighting for victory or for redemption. The engineer was perhaps the most conflicted of them all. He had once built engines for cargo haulers, meant for trade and travel, not war. His family had begged him never to sign on to military projects, and he had promised them he never would. That promise shattered the day the aliens came to his station, burning it to cinders while he floated helplessly in a drifting pod. He had survived, but his family had not. Now he worked the black ship systems with grim determination, though every bolt he tightened and every circuit he repaired reminded him of the life he had lost. More than anyone, he feared the ship itself, its unnatural hum, its systems that seemed too alive. But he worked because without him, it would fall silent again, and silence meant the end of humanity. The black ship felt these burdens, or at least it seemed to. Its halls responded to them, sometimes with lights that flickered like a pulse, other times with a deep resonance that trembled through the floor. The crew never said it aloud, but each of them wondered if the vessel was listening. The old stories had called it a flagship, but it felt like more than that. It felt like a judge, weighing whether humanity was worth its steel. Outside, the rebellion stirred. Messages carried across hidden channels, spreading word of the forgotten flagship's return. Refugees who had lost faith spoke of hope again. Fighters hidden among the asteroid belts whispered that the tide might finally turn. Yet with hope came fear. The aliens had never allowed symbols of defiance to stand for long, and now their fleets scoured the outer systems, searching for the source of the disturbance. The rebellion's leaders argued among themselves. Some urged caution, fearing the black ship's power could bring destruction greater than salvation. Others demanded it be unleashed before the aliens could adapt. And in the middle of it all stood the crew, caught between those who wanted them to be saviors and those who feared them as a curse. As the days passed, the crew explored more of the vessel. They found entire sections sealed off, doors that would not open no matter how they tried. The engineer swore he could hear something moving behind those walls, a vibration that wasn't part of any system he understood. The strategist noted that the ship's layout didn't match its schematics. The corridors twisted into paths that shouldn't exist, and rooms appeared where no room should be. The pilot avoided those places, preferring the bridge, where at least he could see the stars. But even he admitted that sometimes when the ship was quiet, he felt eyes on him, as if the black ship itself was studying his every move. Then came the visions. They began as fleeting impressions, an image in a console's reflection, a whisper in the hum of the engines. The pilot saw burning skies he had never flown beneath. The strategist glimpsed maps of battles she had never fought. The engineer heard voices speaking languages he didn't know, yet somehow understood. None of them admitted it at first, fearing they were going mad. But when the visions grew stronger, they realized the ship was showing them something. What it wanted them to see, they could not yet understand. Suspicion grew as well. The rebellion's leaders sent envoys to demand control of the ship, to install officers who could be trusted. But the black ship refused them. The moment outsiders stepped aboard, its systems shut down, refusing to respond until they left. This only deepened the mystery. Why had it accepted this crew and no one else? What connection tied them to the vessel's return? Questions piled on questions, and with every answer withheld, the tension grew sharper. The aliens were not blind to any of this. Their scouts had begun probing deeper into the graveyard where the ship had awakened. More and more of them were appearing in the outer sectors, pressing against hidden colonies, driving fear back into hearts that had only just begun to hope. The strategist knew it was a matter of time before they found the ship's location, and once they did, they would not stop until it was destroyed. That knowledge gnawed at her, even as she drew up plans for their next move. Still, the crew could not escape the feeling that the black ship itself was leading them somewhere. Its navigation systems lit up without command, guiding them into uncharted regions where no colony had ever reached. The engineer swore the coordinates pointed to something buried, something the ship wanted them to find. Yet they hesitated. Following the path meant walking blind into whatever secrets the vessel had hidden for centuries, and secrets carried danger as surely as they carried power. Each night, if night could exist in the endless dark of space, the crew gathered in the mess, a small circle of light in the vastness of the ship. They spoke in low voices, sharing fragments of their pasts, of the things they had lost. None of them admitted their fears fully, but in the quiet, they all felt it, that they had become part of something far larger than themselves, something that had already chosen its course. Beyond the stars, fleets moved. Alien carriers assembled in silence, preparing to sweep through the graveyard with a force that could crush worlds. Human outposts scrambled to fortify, knowing that if the black ship failed, their rebellion would burn before it ever truly began. And in the heart of the vessel, sealed behind walls that no one could open, the ship's hidden systems stirred once more, as if awakening from a deeper sleep than anyone could imagine. The crew did not yet know what waited ahead. They did not know if the black ship would carry them to triumph or to ruin. All they knew was that the storm was still building, and when it broke, there would be no turning back. The black ship cut silently through the void, its presence a shadow between stars, and though the crew carried themselves with determination, unease sat heavy among them. Every corridor seemed to hum with unseen energy, and every flicker of light whispered of secrets not yet revealed. They had agreed to follow the course the vessel had marked out, yet none of them could shake the thought that it was not they who steered the ship, but the ship steering them. The tension was more than just the threat of the aliens hunting them. It was the fear of what they had awakened. The strategist spent long hours on the bridge, staring at the navigation display. The coordinates that pulsed on the map pointed deeper into uncharted territory, a stretch of space avoided even in older days. Records called it the Silent Drift, a place where signals died and ships vanished without trace. The old fleets had never dared to enter, believing it cursed, though no one could ever explain why. Now the Black Ship guided them directly into it. She argued against the course at first, but each time she tried to alter the heading, the systems resisted. It was as though the ship rejected her changes, always pulling them back toward its chosen path. She told herself it was only programming buried deep in the vessel's systems, but in her heart, she knew it felt like intention. The pilot welcomed the distraction of flight, though he knew he was little more than a passenger to the ship's will. Still, he found comfort in the controls, even when they responded too smoothly, too perfectly, as if anticipating his every movement. He had flown countless ships, but this was different. It was as though his thoughts alone were enough to send the Black Ship diving, weaving, rising through empty space. Yet that closeness unnerved him. The more he flew, the more he felt something press against his mind, a presence heavy and cold, watching him not as a machine would, but as another being might. He did not share this with the others, fearing they would think him broken. But the unease gnawed at him. The engineer buried himself in the work of keeping the ship alive, though he suspected it did not need him as much as it pretended. Systems repaired themselves when he looked away, circuits reformed and conduits rerouted without his touch. Once, when he returned to a panel he had left broken, it was whole again, humming as if nothing had ever been wrong. It should have eased his burden, but it only deepened his suspicion. He began to believe the Black Ship allowed him to make repairs, not because it required them, but because it wanted him to feel useful, to keep him tied to it. Yet what purpose could a vessel serve by toying with its own crew? He kept his doubts hidden, but at night, in the dim glow of the mess, he drank his rations slowly and watched the shadows, waiting for the ship to reveal its true nature. Beyond their personal doubts, the greater conflict grew louder with every passing day. The rebellion had fractured even before the Black Ship returned, but now its return tore the divisions wider. Some leaders hailed it as the spark they needed, a banner for humanity to rally behind. Others feared it was a weapon that would draw fire on already broken colonies, a curse disguised as salvation. Messages came through encrypted channels, demanding updates, demanding proof, demanding control. The strategist fought to keep them at bay, sending carefully measured words that gave just enough hope without revealing their true location. Yet she knew it could not last forever. The rebellion was desperate, and desperation could turn even allies into enemies. Amid this growing strain, the aliens moved with ruthless precision. Fleets massed at the edges of the Silent Drift, scouts slipping in and out, vanishing as though consumed by the void itself. Reports from hidden watchers told of strange distortions near the region, pulses of energy unlike anything recorded. The strategists suspected it was connected to whatever the Black Ship sought, but the rebellion's leaders demanded answers she could not give. Each unanswered demand cut deeper into the fragile trust they had left. Soon, she feared, they would send ships not to aid them, but to seize the vessel outright. Inside the ship, the visions grew worse. The pilot woke in the middle of a sleep cycle, drenched in sweat, haunted by images of alien worlds shattering under fire. The engineer heard voices echoing down empty corridors, calling him by name in tones that were not human. The strategist found her console screens filled with maps of battles that had not yet happened, lines of movement tracing paths toward destruction. None of them could explain it. Yet all of them felt it was tied to the ship's buried memory, as though it carried not only weapons, but echoes of wars long past. One night, as the ship glided deeper into the Silent Drift, the strategist gathered the others in the mess and spoke what none of them wanted to say aloud. She feared the Black Ship was not simply leading them to a battlefield, but to something buried, something older than the rebellion, older even than humanity's war with the aliens. The pilot dismissed it as speculation, clinging to the belief that the vessel was their spear in the coming fight. But the engineer admitted his fear, that the ship's power came not from humanity alone, but from something it had taken or absorbed in the past, something that might no longer serve human will. Their words hung heavy, unanswered, and then, as if mocking their doubts, the ship shuddered, pulling them suddenly from drift into real space. Before them stretched a field of wreckage unlike any they had ever seen. It was not human nor alien. It was older, vast, and broken beyond recognition. Hulks the size of cities floated in silence, their shapes jagged and unfamiliar, their metal scarred with burns that glowed faintly even after centuries. The crew stared in silence as the black ship drifted into the graveyard, its lights flickering as though it had come home. The strategist realized with a chill that this was what the coordinates had led them to. Not a hidden colony, not a weapon cache, but a battlefield that had been erased from history. She wondered if humanity's ancestors had known of it and buried the knowledge, or if the black ship had found it on its own. Either way, the implications were terrifying. If another war had been fought here against enemies neither human nor alien, what had become of them? And why did the black ship seem bound to this place? The pilot leaned forward, his hands tightening on the controls as signals flickered across his screens. Something still moved among the wrecks. Shapes stirred in the shadows, slow and deliberate, their outlines strange and inhuman. He whispered that they were not alone, and the engineer swore he heard the ship hum in response, a low resonance like the drawing of breath before a storm. No one spoke after that. They knew the rebellion's fight was far from over, but what loomed in the graveyard hinted at a conflict deeper than any of them had prepared for. Humanity's final rebellion against the aliens might only be one layer of a far greater war, one that stretched back beyond memory. The ship's lights dimmed, and its course shifted again, threading deeper into the silent wrecks. The crew followed because what choice did they have? The black ship had awakened for a reason, and whatever truth it was dragging them toward, they could not escape it now. The wreckage stretched for light years, a silent grave of ships that no one had known existed. As the black ship drifted deeper into the ruins, the crew felt the weight of countless battles pressing down on them. Each shattered hull told a story of destruction, and none of them resembled the designs of either humanity or the alien fleets they had fought for generations. The strategist studied the shapes in silence, noting how the scars on the metal glowed faintly, as if whatever had destroyed them had burned with power far greater than anything she had seen before. The pilot whispered that it felt like they were trespassers in a place never meant to be seen again, and the engineer muttered that ships did not rot in silence for centuries unless something had wiped out not just fleets, but civilizations. The black ship moved with purpose, threading carefully through the wreckage. It was not lost. It knew exactly where it was going. Each twist of its course brought them closer to the heart of the graveyard, where the hulks grew larger and more ominous. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, each afraid to admit the same thought. The ship had been here before. It did not search as if discovering, but as if remembering. Then the visions began again, sharper, more violent. The pilot saw skies torn open by storms of fire, fleets burning as something vast and unseen consumed them. The strategist's screens lit with maps of impossible battles, lines of movement curling around each other until entire sectors collapsed. The engineer stumbled in the corridors, hearing voices chanting in languages too old for him to know, yet heavy with meaning. They did not speak of what they saw, but the tension between them grew heavier, their silence sharper than any words. As they neared the core of the wreckage, the ship slowed. A structure loomed ahead, massive and alien, its shape half buried in twisted debris. It was not a ship, but something greater, a station or fortress that seemed grown rather than built. Its surface pulsed faintly, as though it still lived, even after centuries in the void. The black ship came to a halt before it, lights dimming, engines thrumming like a heartbeat. The crew held their breath, waiting for something to happen, and then the strategist's console lit with new coordinates, straight into the heart of the structure. The crew argued. The strategist insisted it was madness to enter something they did not understand. Not when alien fleets were still closing in from the outer edges of the silent drift. The engineer warned that the station might not be dead, that whatever had built it might still linger in its depths. But the pilot, his voice steady despite his own fear, said that turning back was no longer possible. The black ship had brought them here for a reason, and if they refused to follow, they would lose not just the battle, but the war itself. Reluctantly, they agreed, and the ship obeyed, gliding into the ancient maw of the structure. Inside, the silence was heavier. The station's halls stretched wide enough to swallow entire fleets, lined with strange spires that glowed faintly as they passed. The engineer swore the lights were reacting to them, waking after centuries of slumber. The pilot's grip on the controls tightened as shapes drifted in the distance, strange constructs that floated like broken guardians, their forms shifting in and out of focus. The strategist's eyes stayed fixed on her screens, where data poured in, most of it unreadable, but one thing clear. The structure was not dead. It was sleeping. Meanwhile, the rebellion beyond the silent drift was unraveling. News of the black ship's disappearance into uncharted space spread, and with it came anger. Some leaders claimed it had abandoned them. Others accused its crew of betraying the cause, of serving their own ends. Fleets that should have united fractured further, each waiting to see whether the black ship would return at all. The aliens exploited this division, tightening their grip, preparing a strike that would finish humanity once and for all. In hidden enclaves, people still clung to hope, but that hope dimmed with every day the black ship remained silent. Back inside the station, the tension mounted. The ship led them to a chamber at the very center, vast and empty, yet filled with an energy that prickled their skin. At its core hung a sphere of light, immense and pulsating, as if it were a heart that still beat after all these centuries. The black ship stopped before it, silent, waiting. None of the crew moved at first. They felt the weight of something far beyond their comprehension pressing against them, testing them. The strategist whispered that it was not just a weapon, but a memory, a remnant of whatever war had been fought here. The engineer feared it was alive, and if they touched it, they might wake something humanity could never control. The pilot, though, felt drawn to it. Every nerve in his body screamed against stepping forward, but he could not look away. He believed, deep down, that this was the reason the black ship had returned, the reason it had chosen them. He reached for the controls, and as he did, the sphere flared with light, flooding the chamber with blinding brilliance. The crew staggered, shielding their eyes, but even through the glare they saw visions, armies of machines, endless fleets clashing in silence, entire worlds turned to ash beneath weapons that bent space itself. They saw the black ship among them, not as it was now, but as it had been then, part of a fleet far larger, carrying weapons that tore holes in the stars. The visions left them trembling. Humanity's war with the aliens was not the first. The black ship had fought before, in a war that stretched across galaxies, against enemies greater than any they now faced. Whatever the sphere contained, it was tied to that war. And now, somehow, the ship had brought them back to it. Before they could react, alarms screamed across the bridge. The strategist's screens filled with signals. The alien fleets had found them. Massive forces were converging on the silent drift, their numbers overwhelming. Somehow, they had tracked the black ship's trail into the graveyard, and now they closed in to destroy it before it could strike again. The crew rushed back to their stations, fear sharpening into urgency. The engineer shouted that the sphere's energy was bleeding into the ship, feeding it, changing it. The pilot gripped the controls, his heart racing, while the strategist's mind raced with desperate calculations. The black ship thrummed louder than ever, its hull glowing faintly as if alive. The alien fleets drew closer, their numbers blotting out the stars, and the sphere at the heart of the station pulsed in rhythm with the ship itself. The crew realized with dawning terror that the coming battle would not simply decide the rebellion's fate. It would awaken something buried, something that might shift the balance of the universe itself. The strategist whispered that once they crossed this line, there would be no return. The engineer begged to shut it down, fearing they would unleash forces they could not control. The pilot only stared ahead, his hands trembling over the controls, knowing that in moments the storm would break. The alien fleets came into range, weapons powering, their formation tightening like a noose. The black ship's systems roared awake, responding to the sphere's light, filling the ship with energy that shook every wall. The crew braced themselves, caught between the terror of what was coming and the desperate hope that they might turn the tide at last. The void held its breath. And then, as the first alien salvos lit the darkness, the black ship surged forward, a spear of power aimed straight at the heart of the enemy. The black ship surged forward, tearing through the void as alien salvos burned around it. But even in the chaos, something felt wrong. The crew braced against the impact of shock waves as the ship's systems roared awake with more power than they had ever felt before. The pilot's hands were steady, but his heart pounded as the vessel responded to his thoughts faster than his movements. It was no longer just following him. It was guiding him, forcing maneuvers he hadn't yet considered. The strategist's console flickered with predictions of battle outcomes that shifted in real time, as if the ship already knew how each move would play out. The engineer shouted over the alarms that the systems weren't only drawing power from the reactor anymore, they were feeding directly off the sphere inside the station. The alien fleets pressed harder, their formations tightening, surrounding the black ship like a pack of predators. But as the first wave of firepower closed in, the ship unleashed a storm unlike anything the crew had seen. Arcs of energy split the darkness, tearing enemy ships apart in a single stroke. Hulls vaporized before shields could respond. The battlefield erupted into chaos as alien formations collapsed, their disciplined movements unraveling under the sheer fury of the black ship's strike. For the first time in years, humanity had struck fear into its enemy. Yet even in that moment of power, a second presence made itself known. The strategist noticed it first. Signals embedded in the sphere's energy, not random, not chaotic, but structured. It was communication. She didn't understand the language, but the cadence was undeniable, like a voice trying to reach them. The pilot, his mind locked with the ship, flinched as if struck. He swore he heard words not in his ears but in his head, fragments of thought that weren't his own. The engineer checked his systems, pale as he realized the black ship wasn't just channeling power, it was awakening something, and that something was beginning to speak through them. The twist cut through their unity like a blade. The strategist argued they had stumbled upon a remnant of whatever ancient war had left this graveyard, and that the ship was now acting as a bridge between humanity and something far older. The engineer shouted that this was the very reason the black ship had been hidden after the first rebellion, that its power had never belonged to humanity alone. The pilot gritted his teeth, refusing to let go of the controls, certain that if he broke the link, they would lose the only chance to break the alien blockade. As the battle raged outside, the war inside the crew grew sharper. Each new surge of power gave the ship more control, and each moment of control pushed the pilot deeper into the connection. His eyes glazed as he whispered words none of them understood, his voice layered with echoes not his own. The strategist reached for him, trying to pull him back, but the ship jerked violently, throwing her to the deck. The engineer screamed that the vessel was no longer obeying human command, it was flying itself. Outside, the aliens realized brute force would not bring the black ship down. Their formations shifted, pulling back, drawing the vessel deeper into the trap. Massive carriers emerged from hyperspace, their weapons glowing with energy meant to crack planets. The strategist saw the maneuver for what it was, a lure to force the black ship into overextending. But the ship did not hesitate. It surged forward again, plunging headfirst into the gauntlet, its storm of energy ripping through the carriers with terrifying precision. The pilot whispered that he could see their moves before they made them, that the ship was feeding him visions of the battle already won, but with every victory came another revelation. The signals from the sphere grew stronger, and the strategist finally began to decode fragments. What she saw chilled her blood. These were not warnings. They were commands. The black ship was not simply awakening. It was receiving instructions from something buried within the station, something that had fought in the ancient war and had never truly died. Humanity had not unlocked the ship. It had been waiting for this exact moment, waiting for another war to draw it back into play. And now, through the pilot, it had found its voice again. The engineer tried to shut it down, frantically rerouting power, but each system he cut only reignited stronger than before. The strategist shouted at him to stop, that if he damaged the systems mid-battle, the aliens would tear them apart before they could recover. But he ignored her, driven by the terror of what was speaking through their ship. His hands shook as he ripped open panels, sparks flying, but the black ship countered every move, closing circuits before he could break them, sealing bulkheads before he could pull power. The engineer staggered back in horror, realizing the vessel no longer needed him at all. The crew's unity splintered. The strategist tried to steady them, insisting they focus on the battle before tearing themselves apart, but the pilot's voice was no longer entirely his own. He whispered of patterns in the alien fleets, of weaknesses invisible to human eyes. He described weapons hidden in the black ship's depths, systems locked away for centuries. His words were precise, mechanical, alien, and yet filled with a conviction that chilled the strategist to her core. It was not just him speaking. Something else was guiding his tongue. The aliens, sensing the shift, unleashed their full fury. The void blazed with fire as they launched weaponry designed to annihilate entire fleets in a single volley. The strategist screamed warnings. The engineer cursed as he scrambled through systems that refused his touch, but the pilot only smiled, his hands tightening on the controls. The black ship turned into the storm, its hull glowing brighter, its weapons building to a crescendo unlike anything yet unleashed. And then, just as the moment peaked, a second twist revealed itself. The strategist's screens filled with new signals, human signals. Fleets of the rebellion, drawn by the energy spike of the battle, had arrived at the edge of the silent drift, but instead of rushing to join them, they held back. Transmission after transmission flooded in, each more desperate than the last. The rebellion's leaders had split, some demanding that the black ship be destroyed before it consumed them all, others begging it to lead them into the final war. Their voices overlapped in chaos, their fleets circling like vultures, watching to see whether the black ship would be savior or doom. The strategist realized with a sickening dread that they were no longer fighting just one enemy. The aliens bore down from the front, relentless and merciless. Behind them, their own people hesitated, divided, waiting to decide whether to follow or betray. And within the ship itself, a presence older than humanity's memory whispered through the pilot, guiding every move. The crew stood on the edge of a storm that threatened to consume them from every direction. The engineers screamed that they had to sever the link, even if it meant crippling the ship. The strategist demanded they hold until they understood what was truly happening. And the pilot, his eyes glowing faintly with reflected light from the consoles, whispered that this was what the black ship had been built for, that humanity's rebellion was not the end of the war, but the beginning of something far larger. The alien fleets closed in. The rebellion's forces hung back, torn between fear and hope. And deep in the heart of the black ship, the sphere's voice grew louder, pressing against the crew's minds, demanding to be heard. The storm was ready to break, but which side of it humanity would stand on remained uncertain. Would the black ship carry them to victory, or would it drag them into a war that was never theirs to begin with? The void burned with light as the alien fleets closed in, their weapons glowing like suns. The black ship roared forward, its storm building with a fury that shook every panel, every corridor, every heart on board. The strategist gripped her console, calculating paths of survival, but every outcome ended in ruin. The engineer slammed his fists against unyielding systems, desperate to shut down the ship's growing hunger, but nothing bent to his will anymore. At the center of it all, the pilot sat locked into the controls, his eyes distant, his voice low as he murmured words that weren't entirely his own. The black ship had become something more than steel and power. It had become alive, and it had chosen this moment to reveal its true strength. The aliens struck first. A wall of fire, wide enough to engulf cities, surged toward them. For a breathless second, it seemed certain the black ship would vanish in the blaze. But then the ship moved, not in any way a vessel should, but like a shadow slipping between cracks in light. Energy bent around it, torn apart before it could land. The crew staggered as the ship returned fire, beams lancing out in perfect arcs, cutting through carriers, annihilating escorts, ripping holes in the enemy line. Whole formations crumbled under its assault. For the first time, the aliens faltered, their precision unraveling as the black ship carved a path of destruction through their ranks. But victory came at a terrible cost. With every surge of power, the link between the pilot and the ship deepened. His voice carried not just his words, but another's, older, colder, commanding. The strategist shouted at him to break free, but he only smiled faintly, whispering that he could see the battle before it happened, that he already knew how it would end. The engineer tried to sever the connection, but the ship sealed him out, redirecting power away from his reach. The black ship was no longer listening to them, it was listening to the sphere, and through the sphere, something else entirely. Then the second threat revealed itself. The rebellion's fleets, watching from the edge of the silent drift, moved. Half surged forward to join, desperate to fight alongside the black ship, while the other half turned weapons toward it, convinced it was no longer humanity's ally, but a curse. Human ships fired on each other, shattering the fragile alliance. Beams of light crisscrossed the darkness as allies became enemies, and the strategist's heart sank. The rebellion had not united. It had broken. The aliens saw the division and pressed harder, their armadas folding inward to crush them all in one strike. The crew stood at the center of chaos, torn between enemies on every side. The strategists screamed that they had to hold the human fleets together or they would destroy themselves before the aliens could. The engineer shouted that it no longer mattered. The ship would decide its own path. And the pilot, his hands steady, his eyes alight, whispered that humanity's fate was no longer theirs to choose. The black ship shuddered as the sphere inside the station pulsed with light, flooding the vessel with energy too vast to contain. Systems overloaded, hull plating glowed red-hot. Alarms screamed across the bridge. But then, in a burst of impossible brilliance, the ship expanded its storm. Energy surged outward in waves, not just destroying enemy vessels, but bending space itself. Alien ships split apart without being touched, their cores unraveling as if erased from reality. Human fleets caught too close, staggered under the blast, their systems failing, their captains screaming for retreat. The strategist's calculations spiraled into chaos. Her mind racing as she realized the black ship wasn't fighting a battle, it was cleansing the field. The pilot's voice rose above the alarms, layered with the echoes of something ancient. He declared that the war with the aliens was only the surface, that a deeper conflict stretched back before humanity was born, and that the black ship had always been built to fight in that war. Humanity, he said, had been nothing more than the next hand chosen to wield it. The strategist cried out that this wasn't victory, it was possession, that they were being used. But the pilot didn't look at her. His gaze was far away, fixed on visions only he could see. The engineer, trembling, made his choice. He tore open the emergency overrides, systems the ship had sealed away from him, and forced his way in. Sparks burned his hands. Alarms shrieked louder. But he pushed forward, screaming that if they let the black ship consume everything, there would be nothing left worth saving. The strategist joined him, overriding failsafes, fighting against the ship's will. Together they clawed for control, even as the vessel resisted like a living beast. The pilot turned toward them, his face calm but no longer entirely human. He warned them that if they severed the link, they would doom not only themselves, but all of humanity. The aliens were breaking. The rebellion was splintering. Only the black ship could bring order through fire. But the strategist shouted back that survival meant nothing without freedom, that humanity could not trade one master for another, no matter how powerful. For a moment, the ship trembled, caught between wills. Energy surged dangerously, threatening to tear it apart from within. The pilot screamed, his voice fracturing into a dozen echoes. The engineer pulled the final circuit, burning his hands raw, and the link shattered. The black ship convulsed. The storm it had unleashed faltered, collapsing inward in a shockwave that ripped apart alien fleets and human vessels alike. Silence followed. The kind of silence that only comes after destruction too great to measure. The crew staggered on the bridge, smoke filling the air, panels shattered, alarms fading. The pilot slumped in his seat, his eyes dull, whispering fragments of the voice that had spoken through him. He was alive, but the link was broken, at least for now. Outside, the battlefield was a graveyard. Alien carriers drifted shattered and burning, their formations broken. Human fleets scattered, some crippled, some retreating, their unity lost. For a brief moment, humanity had struck a blow that would be remembered forever. But the cost was staggering, and the rebellion's future lay in ruins. The strategist pulled herself up, coughing smoke, staring at the wreckage. They had survived the battle, but she knew the war was far from over. The aliens were wounded, not destroyed. Humanity was divided, not united. And the black ship, though weakened, still pulsed faintly, as if waiting for its chance to rise again. Then came the final twist. As the crew tried to recover, the ship's systems flickered one last time. On every screen, a new signal appeared, not from the aliens, not from the rebellion, but from deeper in the silent drift. It was vast, far larger than anything they had faced, and it pulsed with the same energy as the sphere. The strategist's blood ran cold as she realized the truth. The black ship had not been alone in that ancient war. The graveyard had not been the end, but only a fragment of something far greater. The crew exchanged hollow stares, the silence between them heavier than any words. They had fought to claim the black ship as humanity's spear, had risked everything to free it from the grip of something older. And yet, as the new signal grew stronger, they understood with dreadful certainty that the storm was not over. They had only awakened the first winds of a far greater war still waiting in the dark. The battlefield was silent, broken ships drifting like ghosts in the endless dark. Flames flickered on shattered hulls, and the last echoes of the black ship's storm faded into nothing. On the bridge, smoke hung heavy in the air, and the crew sat in exhausted silence, each of them wrestling with what had just happened. They had survived when no one believed survival was possible. The aliens had been driven back, their formations shattered, their pride cut deep. Humanity had struck a blow that would echo through the stars. But victory felt heavy, fragile, and uncertain. The pilot sat slumped in his chair, his hands limp, his face pale. His eyes still flickered with fragments of the presence that had spoken through him, though the connection had been severed. When he whispered, his voice was hoarse, uncertain, as if struggling to remember where his thoughts ended and the ship's whispers had begun. He had seen too much through the link. Visions of wars beyond human memory, of fleets that dwarfed anything the rebellion or the aliens could imagine. Now he carried those visions like scars. The strategist placed a steady hand on his shoulder, grounding him, reminding him he was still human, still himself. The engineer, burned and exhausted, leaned against a shattered panel. His hands ached from tearing the circuits apart, his skin blistered, but he didn't regret it. For the first time, the ship had been forced to yield to human will, even if only for a moment. He knew it had not given up entirely, that its pulse still thrummed in the walls, waiting. But it had been reminded that humanity was not only a passenger, it could resist. That knowledge gave him a fragile kind of hope. The strategist stared out at the wreckage beyond the bridge, her mind heavy with the cost. Human fleets floated broken among the alien remains, their unity destroyed by mistrust and fear. Some captains had chosen loyalty, others had turned their weapons on their own, and the rebellion now lay fractured more than ever. She knew rebuilding that trust would be harder than any battle, yet she also knew the black ship's victory had given humanity something it had not possessed in years: time. The aliens had been wounded, their dominance shaken, and in that wound lay a chance to regroup. The strategist resolved then that she would spend whatever time they had left convincing the rebellion to rise again, even if it meant standing against those who still feared the black ship. As the ship drifted in the silent wreckage, the final questions weighed heavy on them. Why had the black ship returned now? Why had it chosen them? And what was the signal pulsing in the distance, the one that matched the sphere's energy? None of them had the full answer, but the fragments were enough. The graveyard was proof of an older war, one fought on a scale beyond comprehension. The black ship had been part of that war, a survivor waiting to be called again. Humanity had not built its power alone. It was an inheritance, one they barely understood. The sphere had awakened because the conditions had returned. A desperate people on the brink of destruction, an enemy strong enough to force its hand. The pilot finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. He said the signal in the distance was not meant to frighten them. It was a reminder. The black ship was not alone. Somewhere out there, remnants of that ancient conflict still lingered, watching. Humanity had not started this storm, and it would not end it. But now, for the first time, they were no longer helpless. The strategist listened carefully and asked him if those remnants would be friend or foe. The pilot shook his head slowly, unable to say. The truth was they did not know and perhaps would not for years. But they did know one thing. Humanity had stepped into a war larger than itself, and there was no turning back. The engineer broke the heavy silence with a weary laugh. He said that if humanity was going to stand in that kind of war, then they would have to make the black ship theirs, fully and completely. They could no longer let it lead them blindly. It was time to learn its secrets, to bend its power into human hands instead of the other way around. The strategist agreed, knowing the work ahead would be dangerous and slow, but necessary. The pilot simply nodded, still carrying the weight of the visions, but no longer resisting the idea that humanity had a choice in how it wielded its storm. They set course back toward human space, guiding the black ship carefully out of the silent drift. The vessel obeyed, its lights dimmer now, as though it too needed rest. Outside, the stars stretched wide, carrying the silence of an aftermath heavy with consequence. When they finally emerged, messages flooded in. Some hailed them as saviors, others cursed them as destroyers. The strategist answered each one with patience, offering not promises but facts. The aliens had been stopped. Humanity had been given time. What they did with that time would decide everything. News of the battle spread across the colonies. Refugees whispered of the forgotten flagship that had returned from the grave to tear the alien armadas apart. Fighters spoke of hope kindled again, of rebellion no longer fading but stirring to life. Others warned of danger, of a ship that carried voices older than humanity, a storm that could consume them as easily as it had consumed the enemy. Debate raged, but through that debate came something stronger than silence. Unity born not from certainty, but from the knowledge that survival was still possible. The crew of the black ship became symbols, though they had never asked for it. The pilot, haunted but alive, was seen as the one who had guided the vessel through the impossible. The strategist, calm and unyielding, was seen as the voice who had held the rebellion together in its darkest hour. The engineer, scarred but defiant, was seen as proof that humanity could still seize control of its own destiny. Each of them bore the weight of those titles, knowing the truth was far messier, but willing to carry it if it meant giving people something to believe in. Time passed, and the ship became both feared and revered. It no longer hid in silence, but stood at the heart of humanity's scattered fleets, a symbol of both strength and warning. The rebellion began to mend, slowly, painfully, but with new determination. The aliens remained a threat, still powerful, still vast, but no longer invincible. The memory of their defeat at the hands of the black ship lingered, and for the first time, humanity was not simply prey. Yet in the quiet moments, when the crew walked its dark halls, they still felt the pulse of the ship, faint but constant. They knew it had not shown them everything, that its secrets ran deeper than any of them could yet grasp. They knew the signal from the silent drift still pulsed in the distance, a reminder that another storm waited beyond the horizon. But they also knew they had time, and in that time, humanity could prepare, the strategist said once as they sat together in the mess, that the greatest weapon the black ship had given them was not its power, but the reminder that humanity could endure. The pilot agreed quietly, saying endurance was the first step toward victory. The engineer raised his cup and added that if storms were inevitable, then humanity would learn not only to survive them, but to ride them. The black ship continued its vigil in the stars, scarred but unbroken, carrying with it the weight of the past and the promise of the future. Humanity had survived the final rebellion against the aliens, not because of a single ship, but because of the will to fight even when the odds were hopeless. The storm had not ended, but it had shifted, and in that shift, a path forward had opened. And so the forgotten flagship became more than a weapon. It became a reminder that even in the darkest void, when the stars themselves seemed lost, humanity could still rise, still defy, and still claim its place in the endless night.